Welcome to a deep dive into how investors really look at companies in this whole digital world we live in now.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about digital transformation,
Right.
but how do investors separate the real from the hype?
Right.
We're going to take a look at some really interesting research on that today.
There.
It's from the Journal of Management.
Okay.
And the title of the article is kind of a mouthful, but it's called Impact of CEOs' Digital Technology Orientation and Board Characteristics on Firm Value, a signaling perspective.
Oh, wow.
So pretty dense stuff, but I think we can unpack it.
Yeah.
And we're going to discover that it's not just about CEOs name-dropping the latest buzzwords.
Right.
Investors are actually way more sophisticated than that.
Yeah.
They're looking for signals that a company is truly embracing new tech and actually using it to drive value.
Yeah. And it's especially interesting if you think back to the early 2000s,
Oh, yeah.
the very beginning of the internet age.
It's the Wild West out there.
It was total uncharted territory.
Yeah.
I mean, companies were scrambling,
Right.
trying to figure out this whole digital thing, and investors,
Yeah.
they had no historical data.
No.
They had no playbook.
Totally.
It was like trying to predict the weather without a satellite.
Yeah. No radar.
Right. So how do you assess a company's value in that kind of environment?
But how did this study even begin to tackle that question?
Well, they had a pretty clever approach.
Oh, okay.
They focused on something that every CEO writes.
Letters to shareholders.
Letters to shareholders, exactly.
Huh. I wouldn't have thought of those.
I know, right?
They seem pretty standard.
Yeah, but here's the thing. They're public and legally binding.
Oh, okay.
CEOs can't just throw around empty promises in those letters.
There's a lot more at stake.
Exactly. There's real weight to their words.
Got it.
So the researchers compare the content of these letters to a framework of key digital strategies.
Like a digital transformation playbook.
Exactly like a playbook.
Yeah.
And the more a CEO's letter aligned with this playbook, the higher their digital technology orientation score.
So they basically graded the CEOs on their digital commitment.
Yeah, you see that.
But it's not just about the score itself, right?
You're absolutely right.
It's about how that CEO stacks up against their competition.
Exactly. It's all relative.
So it's not enough to just have a good digital score. You have to be the best in your class.
Think of it like this.
Okay.
Imagine you're an investor
Okay.
looking at two companies in the same industry.
Okay.
One CEO is just kind of keeping up with the digital trends,
Right.
while the other one's a real trailblazer out in front, pushing the boundaries.
Yeah.
Who you can invest in?
The trailblazer every time.
Exactly. And that's why this relative digital orientation is so important.
It shows who's truly committed to digital transformation.
And who's just paying lip service.
Right. But even the most digitally savvy CEO can't do it all alone, can they?
You're absolutely right. They need a strong team.
So does that mean the board of directors comes into play here?
The board is crucial, and investors know this.
Oh, interesting.
They're paying close attention to the board's composition.
So I shouldn't just be reading the CEO's letter.
No,
I should also be checking out who's sitting on the board.
it's all part of the bigger picture.
Wow, that's a game changer.
And this study actually digs into the specific board characteristics that can amplify or hinder a CEO's digital impact.
Okay, so what are we talking about here?
Well, they looked at three key factors.
Okay.
The board's digital expertise,
Okay.
their knowledge diversity,
Okay.
and their overall power to influence the CEO's decisions.
So not just any board will do.
It's about the right mix of skills and experience.
Okay, so let's start with digital expertise.
Okay.
I mean, does that even really matter anymore?
You'd think everyone's digitally savvy these days, right?
Right.
But the researchers were looking for something much deeper.
So not just knowing how to use a smartphone,
No, not just that.
but having real in-depth knowledge of digital technologies and strategies.
Exactly. They wanted to see how many board members had actual backgrounds in digital fields.
So like formal education.
Yes. Things like engineering degrees,
Yeah.
computer science, math, physics, the real building blocks of digital technology.
They were looking for the heavy hitters.
Exactly. They wanted people who could understand the technology at a fundamental level.
Got it.
And it's not just about theoretical knowledge either.
Right.
They also looked at whether board members had actual work experience in digital roles.
So like a chief technology officer or something.
Exactly, or a head of digital strategy, someone who's actually been in the trenches leading digital initiatives.
So they've got the scars to prove it.
Exactly. And finally, they looked at whether board members had experience in industries where digital transformation was already well underway.
So industries that were ahead of the curve?
Exactly like aerospace, automotive, financial services, places where digital technologies were already reshaping the landscape.
So they'd have a front row seat to the whole digital revolution.
Exactly. They'd have seen firsthand how digital transformation can disrupt an entire sector.
Oh, both the good and the bad.
Exactly, the challenges and the opportunities.
Okay, so that's digital expertise.
Right.
What about knowledge diversity?
So for that, they didn't just stop at digital expertise.
Okay.
They look at the whole spectrum of educational backgrounds, job roles, and industry experiences represented on the board.
So a real mix of perspectives.
Exactly. They wanted to see a diversity of thought, a real melting pot of ideas.
Because digital transformation touches every aspect of a business, right?
Exactly. You need people who can see the big picture
Yeah.
and anticipate how these changes will ripple across different departments and functions.
It's not just a tech problem.
It's a business problem, and you need a diverse set of minds to tackle it effectively.
Makes sense. So we've got digital expertise,
Right.
knowledge diversity,
Yeah.
and the last one was board power, right?
Yes. The power to influence the CEO's decisions.
How do you even begin to measure that?
Well, they took a multi-pronged approach. They looked at the percentage of independent board members.
Those not directly employed by the company.
Exactly. They also considered how long those independent members had served on the board.
Giving more weight to those with longer tenures.
Exactly. Experience matters.
Makes sense.
And they also factored in how much stock those independent board members owned.
So they had skin in the game.
Exactly. A real stake in the company's success.
So all of these factors combined give you a sense of the board's power.
Exactly. A board with a high percentage of long-serving independent members who owned a lot of stock would have much more clout than a board made up mostly of company insiders.
Right, so they'd be more likely to push back against the CEO if they thought it was necessary.
Exactly. They'd be able to hold the CEO accountable.
So it's not just about expertise, it's about having the power to use that expertise.
Exactly. It's about having a voice at the table and not being afraid to use it.
Okay, so we've got these three key factors: digital expertise, knowledge diversity, and board power. Now, how did the researchers actually connect all of this back to a company's value?
Well, that's where the real magic happens. And that's what we'll get into in the next part of this deep dive.
Okay, I can't wait to hear more about that.
We'll uncover some pretty interesting findings.
Stay tuned, everybody.
We'll be right back.
Okay, so we left off talking about how the researchers measured all these different factors, like a CEO's digital orientation and the board's expertise.
Right, a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, so how did they actually put it all together and connect it back to a company's actual value?
Well, the results were pretty compelling.
Okay, lay it on me.
They found a clear and significant link between a CEO's relative digital orientation and a company's stock market value.
So CEOs who were ahead of the game digitally were actually being rewarded by investors.
That's right, their digital savvy translated into real dollars.
And how big of an impact are we talking here?
It wasn't just a small bump.
Okay.
The study found that for the average company, a higher relative digital orientation translated into millions of dollars in added market value.
Wow, so that's a pretty clear message to CEOs.
Right, get on board with digital transformation or get left behind.
But it's not a solo mission, right?
Absolutely not.
You need a board that can keep up with you.
Exactly, and that's where the board's characteristics come into play.
Right, we were talking about digital expertise, knowledge diversity, and board power.
Exactly, and the researchers found that board digital expertise and knowledge diversity both magnify the positive effects of the CEO's digital orientation.
So it's like a multiplier effect.
Exactly like having a team of expert navigators guiding the CEO through the digital landscape.
So a digitally savvy CEO is great.
Yes,
But a digitally savvy CEO with a strong and diverse board is even better.
absolutely. It's all about alignment. Investors are looking for companies where the CEO and the board are on the same page, working together to navigate the digital transformation journey.
This is all so fascinating, and it really highlights the importance of looking beyond just the CEO when you're evaluating a company.
Absolutely. You have to consider the whole picture.
Right. But like we talked about earlier, context matters.
Yes, very important.
This study focused on large, well-established U.S. companies.
Right.
But what about the rest of the world?
That's a great question, and it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, the dynamics might be totally different for smaller companies or startups.
Exactly, especially those operating in different parts of the world.
Right, where the digital landscape might be completely different.
Absolutely. So as investors, we can't just blindly apply these findings to every company we analyze.
Right, we need to think critically about the specific context.
Exactly. This research provides a valuable framework,
Yeah.
but just a starting point. Every investment decision requires careful consideration of the company, the industry, and the broader context.
All right, well said. So there you have it.
Uh-huh.
Deep dive into how investors perceive digital transformation
Right.
and the crucial roles played by the CEO and the board.
The dynamic duo.
I've learned a lot, and I hope you have too.
Me too. It's been a great discussion.
What are your final thoughts on all this?
I think this research is a fantastic example of how we can use data and sophisticated analytical techniques to better understand the complex world of business.
Yeah.
It sheds light on the signals that investors are looking for and the factors that drive their decisions.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that in today's rapidly evolving business landscape, staying ahead of the curve requires not just embracing digital transformation,
Right.
but also having a right leadership and governance structures in place. This is a conversation that I think we'll be revisiting for years to come.
I agree, and I'm excited to see how this research evolves as the digital landscape continues to shift and reshape the business world as we know it.
Me too. And speaking of shifting landscapes, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
But there's always more to explore. So in our next segment, let's step back and consider some of the broader implications of these findings.
Okay.
What does this research tell us about the future of leadership in the digital age?
Lots to unpack there.
Stay tuned. All right, so we've talked about how investors look at CEOs and boards when it comes to digital transformation.
Right.
But what does all this mean for leadership going forward? It feels like the rules of the game are changing.
Yeah, it's definitely a new era.
So what kind of leader does it take to thrive in this digital world?
Well, I think this research really points to the need for a different kind of leader.
Okay.
Someone who's not just tech savvy,
Right.
but can actually drive transformation.
So more than just knowing the gadgets.
Yeah, much more. They need to be digital visionaries,
Okay.
able to see the big picture and articulate a clear digital strategy.
And get everyone on board.
Exactly. They have to inspire their teams to embrace the change.
But they can't do it alone, right?
Absolutely not. They need a board that's right there with them.
So the board needs to be just as committed to digital transformation.
Yeah, it's a true partnership. They need to provide guidance, support, and even challenge the CEO's thinking when necessary.
So it's a balancing act.
Exactly. It's like a high-stakes game of chess.
Uh,
The CEO and the board working together to outmaneuver the competition in this rapidly changing digital landscape.
And the stakes are only getting higher, right?
Absolutely. As technology keeps advancing, the ability to adapt and innovate becomes even more crucial.
So for aspiring leaders out there,
Yeah.
what are the key takeaways? What skills do you need to succeed in this digital era?
Well, first and foremost, you have to be a lifelong learner.
Okay.
The digital landscape is constantly changing, so you have to constantly be learning and growing.
So never stop learning.
Exactly. And you have to be comfortable with not knowing everything.
Okay.
Be willing to experiment and embrace new ideas.
So a growth mindset is essential.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not just about technical skills.
Great.
It's also about leadership style.
So what kind of leadership style do you think is best suited for digital transformation?
I think it's a combination of visionary thinking and collaborative leadership.
Okay.
You need to be able to paint a picture of the future, but also empower your team to contribute their ideas and expertise.
So it's about creating a culture of shared ownership.
Exactly. Where everyone feels invested in the company's digital success.
And it's not just about internal collaboration, right?
No. You also have to be good at building partnerships outside the company.
So working with other businesses.
Yeah, digital transformation often requires leveraging the strengths of other organizations, like technology providers, startups, or even competitors.
So the lines are blurring.
Exactly. It's a whole new way of thinking about business.
This has been a really insightful deep dive.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
It's clear that digital transformation is not just a technology challenge.
Right.
It's a leadership challenge.
It's a challenge that forces us to rethink everything about how we lead and govern organizations.
Well said. We've uncovered some really interesting findings.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm sure it's sparked a lot of questions for our listeners.
Probably.
If you want to learn more, we'll be sharing links to the research and other resources in the show notes.
Great.
And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries.
The digital age is full of possibilities.
So well said. That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this depth dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious.